VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
We so appreciate you tuning into Crosstalk each weekday at this time here on the VCY America Network. We're going to get right into our issues here today because today we are focusing in on Israel. With us today on Crosstalk is Bill Sutter, the Executive Director of the Friends of Israel. They are a worldwide Christian organization headquartered in New Jersey. They're an all-important voice in evangelical circles for their Bible teaching, support for the State of Israel, and opposition to anti-Jewish doctrine and activities. They have a magazine called Israel My Glory, some 200,000 in circulation. They are active in Christian and Jewish circles. Bill teaches about present-day threats to Christianity and Judaism and is a strong advocate of the country's growing Jewish-Christian alliance. Bill, welcome to Crosstalk here today.
Jim, it is so good to be with you again.
We are going to put our focus on Israel, and as you say through your daily radio broadcast, we're going to put an eye on the Middle East, and we're going to look at some significant happenings that are going on today and threats against Israel. Last week, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, told his cabinet that, quote, the Israeli government has the right, duty, and capability to prevent the elimination of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. What precipitated such a comment from him?
Well, I think there are many forces in the world that are lining up against Israel, to call Israel an illegitimate state, to threaten Israel with terrorism by, for example, Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in the north. The threats from Iran are daunting, where we've been hearing constant tirades against the State of Israel. Here in the United States, movements are underway to speak against Israel, to teach against Israel. We have a conference coming up this weekend at the University of Pennsylvania, and it is highlighting and trying to organize support against the State of Israel, pro-Palestinian, but when it comes to Israel, it's divest, it's boycott, it's sanctions. So many forces are lining up against the Jewish state, but when I became aware of Netanyahu's most recent comment, it reminded me when he was back in the Philadelphia area a few years ago, and he said he said, quote, there is no prime minister of Israel who wouldn't do whatever was necessary to protect the Jewish people, end of quote. So he's taking on that tremendous responsibility, and it's a biggie.
Well, with Israel being in the crosshairs of so many enemy nations, and Israel just a fraction of the size of her enemies, and with Israel being on shaky grounds, even at times with our President Obama administration, in the natural, it really doesn't look so good for Israel, does it?
No, it doesn't look good. From a human standpoint, when we think of all these forces aligned against the Jewish state, and as you alluded to, more recently and most recently, the very President of the United States taking positions that are counter to Israel's security. All these things lead us to believe it looks very, very dim as far as Israel is concerned. Yet we also know that God did not bring Israel back from the dead. Ezekiel chapter 38, in 1948, modern state of Israel was reborn. He didn't bring it to bring it out of existence again. We believe that we are living in the times of some of the greatest fulfillment of biblical prophecy since, really, the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Amen. Hey, whatever happened to this big surge that was occurring this past fall for a declared Palestinian state?
That was an interesting set of circumstances because the Palestinian Authority, and in particular President Abbas, went to the United Nations, first to the General Assembly, and sought to have the General Assembly provide support for a Palestinian state, which in fact it did by an overwhelming vote. Then and without support of the Security Council, it could not happen. And so it went over to the Security Council, 15 members, permanent members, and members who go in and out of the Security Council. And it has pretty well died down there since. I think there's been a lot of behind-the-scenes maneuvering to try to prevent a direct vote. I think the United States does not want to have to be in the position of standing up for Israel at the Security Council. So things have been deferred. It has died down. It has somewhat gone off the table, and we do not know when it may come back at the United Nations.
And it's rather interesting because if my memory serves me correct, that the Obama administration was saying basically any further talks about this are off until after the presidential election. And that really caused me to wonder if indeed Mr. Obama is reelected, what is going to be in store for Israel and the creation of this Palestinian state?
Jim, I had to wonder exactly the same thing. Because with President Obama's leadership, if he is reelected, and there being 5 permanent members of the Security Council, the United States being one, and those 5 votes are required to declare a Palestinian state. Actually, 9 votes from the whole Security Council, but 5 are absolutely required: China, France, Russia, UK, and the United States. With the United States leadership declaring a Palestinian state at that point, I would believe it would be sure to happen. So it's a great concern to me to think ahead. While it seems to be off the table now, when will it come back? How will it come back? And will it be further ratcheting up pressure against the state of Israel?
We're talking today with Bill Sutter, the president of the Friends of Israel. Bill, WorldNet Daily, or now WND, they carried an article last week entitled "Iran Preparing Now for Armageddon," pointing out that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, has had several secret meetings with his economic and military advisors, preparing for the possibility of war with the United States. And Khomeini has been heard to say that the coming of the last Islamic Messiah is near. Specific actions need to be taken to protect the Islamic regime for upcoming events. Can you explain what it's meant by all of this?
Wow. Yeah. It's quite an interesting combination of a brutal political power with a radical Shiite Islamist element of it. The whole idea of the Islamic Messiah, and that would be the 12th Imam, the 12th in succession from Muhammad. The year was 900, and the 12th Imam was only 5 years old when he absolutely disappeared. And he is regarded as the Mahdi, the guided one, the Islamic Messiah, who would be the one to return. And so Iran is looking for that return. And you say, well, when would that be? You know, how could this be? When would it be? Iran is now signaling that the return of the Islamic Messiah is near. They've used the word near many times. In fact, they have a video release now entitled "The Coming is Near." It was released by the government of Iran, and it describes the worldwide Islamic conquest under the Mahdi, the guided one, who is identified as the 12th Imam, 12th in succession from Muhammad, who would reappear and has been in hiding for all of these years.
Is there any stated purpose for his return?
Absolutely. The stated purpose is to set things right, and by that they mean 3 things. They mean the defeat of Israel, and by the way, there is a radical Islamic gospel, good news, if you will, and that good news is the defeat of Israel. So it would mean the defeat of Israel. It would mean the crush of Western powers. So the Islamic Mahdi, the guided one, Messiah, would crush the Western powers. And finally, he would bring dissident Muslims under his rule. And they realized that there would be dissident Muslims who would not necessarily take to his rule when he returns. So those three things would be the purpose of his return.
Could this term dissident Muslims have any meaning as far as what we know today as peaceful Muslims or conservative Muslims or nonviolent Muslims, as compared to extremists? Those. Is there any connection between those two?
Well, I think there certainly could be. The fact is that a growing percentage of the Muslim world is becoming more rather than less extremist. But it certainly doesn't mean everybody. And throughout the world, there are secular Islamist countries. There are secular members of Islam. Let's put it this way: they are more secular. They're still Muslims, but they tend to be more secular in how they believe a government should operate. And it would be people like that who would not be willing to be brought onto the radical Shiite Islamic Messiah who could be the dissidents and who would be the ones who would potentially give the Islamic Messiah a lot of problem at his coming.
Does Ahmadinejad believe that he can help usher in the hastening of the Islamic Messiah?
Yeah, we do see that for sure. And the whole idea is, it starts with a huge number of threats from Ahmadinejad. Israel must be wiped off the map, and then he holds these worldwide conferences of they're termed World Against Zionism conferences. And so since his election in 2005, he has continued unabated threats against Israel, against the Jewish state, against Jewish people in general. And he really believes that the key to the return of the Islamic Messiah is chaos here on earth. And so the more chaos that he can create carries with it the idea that then Messiah will have to come to straighten it all out.
Wow.
And so we see that pattern in his speaking. Of course, the chaos that he intends to create is never within Iran itself. Mm-hmm. It's always everywhere else.
Welcome to the Occupy movement.
Oh, boy, true.
Yeah. Is there any connection to the Islamic Messiah, this coming Mahdi, and what we know as Antichrist in the Bible?
Well, I think there's some potential for that. It's hard to know. I know there's some thinking within prophetic teaching that there could be a real tie here, and I haven't thought too seriously about that since, in fact, I think that probably the Lord will deal with Islam in a way that is different from how he deals with the Antichrist. So we'll see about that. But it's interesting. The whole concept of going forward and judgment and Armageddon and God's destruction of the Antichrist is a fascinating biblical study of its own.
And we're going to take a look at the Islamic view of Armageddon after the break. You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America as we talk with Bill Sutter today, president of the Friends of Israel. We'll be right back.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, what is cold dark matter?
Chris, cold dark matter is mysterious matter which has not yet been discovered, but according to the Big Bang Theory makes up most of the mass in the universe. It's totally imaginary. A recent experiment put a super-sensitive detector about a half-mile below the surface of the ground. They thought they would be able to detect these cold dark matter particles, but none were found. Well, this didn't deter them from their quest. They just determined to build a more sensitive piece of equipment to try to find them. I think maybe what's wrong is the Big Bang Theory itself. In order to make it work, they need imaginary, cold, dark matter, like relying on the Tooth Fairy or Santa Claus. Face it, the Big Bang Theory is fizzling out. A better theory about the origin of the universe is the one we read about when we go back to Genesis.
For more on creation, visit our website at www.icr.org.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Our guest, Bill Sutter, president of the Friends of Israel. And we're talking today with a focus on Israel. Bill, as we talk about this Armageddon, let's look at this word here, what it means to Islam. What does it mean not only to Islam, what does it mean to the Jewish people, and how does this compare or contrast to the biblical teaching of Armageddon?
Well, one thing for certain, the term Armageddon to the world is a very disturbing kind of a concept where things spin out of control, almost as if without a guiding hand, and it's very man-centered, and it's almost, made for movies, I guess, kind of thing, the world's concept of Armageddon. The Islamic concept of Armageddon is also a tremendous amount of chaos on the earth that the Islamic Messiah returns to take care of. And that means, to them, Israel is chaos, and Israel has to be crushed, and the Western powers are chaos, and they have to be taken care of, and dissident Muslims and so on. When it comes to the Jewish people, we run into a curious kind of thinking that, and a certain fear that maybe the Christian teaching of Armageddon means death to the Jews, of all things. And even, worse yet, at the hands of Christians. Now, keeping that in mind, we can say, well, that's just exactly the opposite of the biblical teaching of Armageddon. By the way, Armageddon is mentioned in Revelation chapter 16. It's the only place the term is used, but the battle is described in Revelation 19, and then picked up, I believe, and coordinates exactly with Joel chapter 3. And it's the concept of God's judgment on the godless Gentile nations of the world. And the reason he's doing this, I think Joel chapter 3 makes it real clear. It's because of the horrific way that these Gentile nations and peoples of the world treated God's ancient people, the Jewish people. So in a real sense, Armageddon is God's ultimate line of protection of the Jewish people. And I believe that is the story of history, and that's the best story that we can lead with as we relate to Jewish people, that we believe that the big story of history is God's ultimate protection of his ancient people, the Jewish people.
Now, we've been hearing, in regard to those threats, we've been hearing a lot about the threat of nuclear capabilities, with Iran achieving those. How imminent do you believe this is, and do you believe Israel's going to intervene at an appropriate time prior to their achieving this capability?
Great question. I think Iran is getting very close to having deliverable nuclear capability. I know last Sunday, Leon Panetta, our Secretary of Defense of the United States, was on television, and he declared that he felt that a nuclear bomb could be a year away, and Iran's ability to deliver it 2 to 3 years away. And you almost see some of this somewhat relaxed view by the United States. It's not. It's always future. It's always future, and giving breathing room. But to Israel, Iran is a huge immediate threat. And I think it's probably truer in terms of Israel. Of course, Iran's ability to deliver nuclear weapons by missiles is now increased to about 1,500 miles. Israel is well within that space, but the United States isn't. So you could see the differing perspectives. The United States, well, there's more time. Israel, there isn't more time. But I did notice this, Jim, that whenever either the Embassy of Israel in the United States or the consulates of Israel, I think there are 9 of them throughout the United States, when they send out speakers, the consul general, the ambassador, and so on, they always, no matter what the subject is, they always end and make clear the threat of Iran. So I feel that yes, if it comes down to the point where Israel feels there is no return, that the pathway is there for Iran to deliver nuclear weapons, I believe, and it'll be horrific, but I believe Israel will take action.
Now, you mentioned the missile delivery system capabilities. There have been also some articles coming out regarding what they call an astonishing subsurface capabilities out with submarines underwater. Any information on that?
I don't, but I guess there has been some effort with Iran to expand their influence in this hemisphere and to possibly prepare for that kind of military exercise with states like Venezuela. So it's clearly Iran intends to be a huge world power exercising its muscle, and of course the threats are right before us. Ahmadinejad, Israel must be wiped off the map.
And he just recently toured through a number of Latin American countries, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, Ecuador, a number of nations run by left-wing governments that are hostile to the United States. Has there any information surfaced as to the purpose of these visits that he was making?
I think he's made real clear his desire to be a big player on the world scene. And he's carrying out that, and I think we see real evidence of, frightfully so, but real evidence of his leadership among radical elements, even here in our own hemisphere. When you talk about Cuba, Venezuela, and so on, the most radical elements of the Americas. And so I think we need to be very, very concerned. I'd like to see more concern demonstrated on the part of our president. I think we have too much talk about engagement and negotiation, sanctions which have been ineffective. Even the latest is, we've got to stop and evaluate Iran's real intent. You know, intent is something we have to study. The fact of the matter is, they are moving toward the ability to deliver nuclear weapons, not only throughout the Middle East, but as far as Eastern Europe, Northern Africa, India, China, and it's not far off.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out this intent. I mean, when you outlined, defeat of Israel, the crush of Western powers and dissident Muslims under the rule of the Mahdi, the intent is pretty clear to me.
It certainly is. They have a purpose. They're pursuing it. And the real danger of this is that the linkage between culture, politics, and a religion that supports all of this and is thoroughly radical and even suicidal. So it makes it very dangerous, certainly for Israel first, and then for the rest of the world.
Let's talk about the Muslim Brotherhood. They're achieving a great foothold in many, many ways, many, many areas. Is this of concern?
It's of great concern. And this is not something that started last year or the year before. The Muslim Brotherhood actually goes back to 1928, and its purpose is to implement Sharia law and to actually establish a global Islamic state. That's why it was organized, and it is well organized. They even have a motto. The motto is, jihad is our path, martyrdom is our aspiration. They are behind every radical idea that's been floated and operated on and implemented in the Middle East over the years.
What about their rise in Egypt of late? Is this a new threat for Israel?
Oh, for sure. I mean, Mubarak is gone, but in its place, the Supreme Council of Armed Forces has instituted voting. As the voting's coming to a conclusion for the lower chamber, very disturbing that very close to 50% of the candidates are sponsored and supported by the Muslim Brotherhood, and another 25% these are the winning candidates, the ones who are being seated in the parliament. total of almost 75% are from radical Islamist groups. 50% Muslim Brotherhood, 25% the second most, quote, popular radical Islamist group. So it's a very dangerous situation for Israel. They're going to actually choose 100 members to form a constitution committee and to elect a president in June. But here's the problem. Is it a democracy as it's functioning today? The answer is yes, of sorts. But I'm fearful that it means very little when the people have a steady diet of anti-Israel, anti-Jewish propaganda.
As we mentioned this, just over the weekend, jury on Sunday found an Afghan father, his wife, their son guilty of killing 3 teenage sisters and a co-wife in what the judge described as cold-blooded, shameful murders resulting from a twisted concept of honor. We're talking about honor killings here, Bill, under the guise of religion.
We are. It's very disturbing. It is anything but how a democratic government should operate. There are tremendous threats coming out of these other countries to Israel. Israel has a very long border, for example, with Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula. I'm estimating hundreds of miles, and incursions are occurring from these radical elements. It's not good for Israel. It's not good for the world. It's not good for the United States.
Do you believe or have any concerns that the U.S. is going to cave to the growing dominance of Islam and the Muslim Brotherhood and the U.S. itself becoming a threat to Israel?
It's a discouraging thought, but I think we see some of that underway already. It was very discouraging to see President Obama, for example, talk about negotiations beginning between the Palestinians and Israel along the lines of pre-67 borders. Mm-hmm. They aren't borders. They are armistice lines from 1948. To act like there was something in place of a legal entity when it didn't exist. It was very discouraging, for example, to see President Obama take a position against a Jewish community in what he described as East Jerusalem. There is no municipality of East Jerusalem. There is an eastern section of Jerusalem, and it has had Jewish people for a long time. It is biblical Israel. It is the holiest sites of our Christian faith and of the Jewish people. And to act like East Jerusalem is some other kind of municipal entity that he, in fact, has reserved for perhaps another party, such as Arab Muslims. We're seeing some of that underway. The Muslim Brotherhood itself, Jim, here in the United States and in Canada, is establishing its entities on campus. And they are campus Muslim groups that are being established. In fact, it's got a name, Muslim Students Association. So we're seeing these influences. They are right here in the United States, and they concern us greatly.
We're talking today with Bill Sutter, the president of the Friends of Israel. We're just seconds away from a break. And folks, if you would go get a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, because after the break, we're going to be providing for you information how you can obtain a copy of the publication from the Friends of Israel called Israel, My Glory, a powerful publication that'll keep you informed on many of these kinds of issues and address many things from scriptures as it relates to Bible prophecy in Israel. So be ready to write it down after the break. You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America.
Here at VCY, we believe that we are to be salt and light in our society. We strongly believe that people can make a difference and be a voice for that which is right. But there's something far more important than all of this, and that is your personal relationship to Jesus Christ. Or you may call congressmen every day on important issues, and you might hold a sign at a protest. But unless you know Jesus as your personal Savior, you're missing out on the most important thing in life. I'd like to send you a small brochure entitled, Where Will You Spend Eternity? This pamphlet shares with you in a very clear way the most important decision you could ever make in your life, and that's placing your trust in Jesus Christ. Our telephone number is 800-729-9829. Call and ask for your free copy of Where Will You Spend Eternity? Again, our number is 800-729-9829. Don't miss out on the most important thing in life. Call today.
Well, today our focus is on Israel, and we're talking with Bill Sutter today, president of the Friends of Israel. And one of the ministries of Friends of Israel is their publication. It's their magazine called Israel, My Glory. Bill, tell us about the magazine.
Well, Israel, My Glory is full color, 44 pages. We feature biblical teaching, prophetic teaching from the Scriptures, news and views from Israel and the Middle East. And so we have a keen focus on Israel. We have a keen focus on the Jewish people. We have subscribers in all states of the United States, all Canadian provinces, and a total of 150 countries worldwide. And we offer the first year, that would be 6 issues. It's bi-monthly. We offer the first year free of charge. So it can easily be accessed by our website, foi.org. That's FOI for Friends of Israel, or by direct phone in, and we have people standing by at 800-257-7843.
And so all they'd have to do is say, I heard Bill on Crosstalk, I'd like to get a free year subscription to the magazine.
Yep, and it will be on its way.
Wow. Okay, folks, here again is the information. It's 1-800-257-7843, and you can just mention that you'd like the free year subscription to the magazine, 800-257-7843, or visit their website, foi.org, and on that site you're going to see the headlines there of one of the options is magazine, and then it has IMG free trial. That stands for Israel My Glory free trial. You click on that, you can put in the information, and it'll come your way as well. But dealing with biblical teaching, of biblical prophecy issues, news and views on Israel, just a powerful publication to help keep you not only informed on what's happening in the world today, but informed what Scripture has to say to these important issues. So trust you'll take advantage of that. Let's open our phone lines. If you have a question you'd like to ask of our guest here today, a comment, our number 800-733-9829. That's 1-800-733-9829, where you can speak firsthand with our guest today. Bill, I know that there's concern that's happening even here within the United States as to how the promotion of Islam is just been invading the educational system here across our own land, in textbooks, promotions, and on the list goes.
It's true, and the problem with it is it's done in such a positive light, with none of the negatives, and Islam has such substantial negatives when it comes to our very freedoms, and of course what it's doing to Christians around the world, to non-Muslims around the world, is just horrific.
Our number here to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829, to speak with our guest here today, Bill Sutter. We'll take your phone calls. I see the lines are packed, and we're getting these processed right now to take your phone calls today here on Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. And again, to obtain that year subscription, a free subscription to Israel My Glory, you can call them at 800-257-7843. Let's begin in Blue River, Wisconsin. Bill, thank you for calling Crosstalk. You're on the air.
Yes, thank you for your program. It's very enlightening. I'm concerned about, of course everyone is, a doomsday scenario involving the Straits of Hormuz, where there's 20 million barrels a day that moves through the Straits, and an imminent attack with Iran would produce a devastating effect on our naval forces. It's just, I mean, the country is 4 times the size of Iraq. We're not messing with something small. It's a doomsday scenario, and it would be the end.
Bill, your thoughts?
Well, of course, we can certainly paint a horrific scenario of strikes and counterstrikes and all the rest, and even the very destruction of the whole state of Israel. But I just believe. Let's take Israel for example. I just believe with all my heart that Iran, for example, will not destroy Israel. The nations surrounding Israel will not destroy Israel. The terrorists surrounding Israel will not destroy Israel. And I can't picture how the Lord is going to work it out necessarily. But I know that He will protect that land and His ancient people. The rest of the world, of course, can degenerate into all kinds of conflict and problems. But, back in 1948, in fact, 10 years before 1948, when this ministry, the Friends of Israel, was founded by Christians in the city of Philadelphia who were aware of Jewish people experiencing persecution in Europe, and they took to themselves the name of Israel in the name of the Friends of Israel. It couldn't have been predicted how there would be an Israel someday, but they had a biblical sense that there would be. So while I can't predict what will happen to the nations of the world, other than their ultimate judgment by the Lord at the end of the tribulation period, I can predict there will be an Israel, and that God will take care of His own.
Thank you for the call. Next to Lou. You're on the air, Lou. Thanks for calling Crosstalk.
Hey, Jim. I just needed that number again for that magazine.
Bill, do you have that?
Yes, it's 1-800-257-7843. And you'll join close to 250,000 worldwide subscribers. The first year is absolutely free.
Well, thank you very much, and you guys keep it up.
Thank you, Lou. Appreciate your call. Renee, you're our next caller. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes. I just wondered if your guest speaker could tell us, there's so many Jewish people, even talk show hosts, that support Muslim-type, coexist-type philosophy, and President Obama, and all this, they're going to just sing Kumbaya and join hands and be all nicey-nicey. Even we have wealthy people like the Rothschilds who want a one-world order system that seems to be playing into this one-world government, which is what they want. They want a caliphate. Is there anything going on within the synagogues and the Jewish community themselves that's counteracting this philosophy that this isn't going to happen like this? This isn't going to come down like this. We need to get real and realize that this is an enemy out here that wants to kill Israel, wants to hurt the United States, wants to hurt the free world, Christians and Jews. So I'll just hang up and take your comments off the air.
Thank you.
Excellent question, Renee. And what you have observed is absolutely true, and that is a certain thrust among the Jewish people of a liberal mindset, liberal worldview, philosophies that are seemingly and I believe are counterproductive to their very existence. However, it's not universal, and we are seeing more and more Jewish people speaking out. This would have been unthinkable probably 10, 15 years ago, maybe a half dozen years ago, that we at Friends of Israel would be invited into synagogues, Jewish community centers, Jewish organizational meetings of boards, and asked to explain ourselves, and we always use the opportunity to proclaim God's promises to the Jewish people. We're seeing a growing conservative-minded element rising up. One of the reflections of that is the fact that there is, in fact, a Republican Jewish coalition and of just Jewish people. And I'm told now that it has grown to the point that there are 50,000 members of the Republican Jewish coalition. But there are other groups forming and becoming more informed and rising up to tell the truth, to tell the truth about Islam, to tell the truth about the threats against Israel. And so I would be encouraged, Renee, and I do present a word of encouragement from what we personally are experiencing. There would not be this increasing Jewish-Christian coalition if it were not for the fact that there is a growing conservative-minded group among the Jewish people.
Bill, I became aware of an article sent to me by the Arab American News. And this was Christmas Day that they came out with this article. The headline caught my attention: Tri-Faith Project to Construct Multi-million-dollar Interfaith Complex in America's Heartland. And the focus of this, what they're calling a new project, creators call the first development of its kind in the world, hopes to shed light on the similarities with the building of a new tri-faith project, privately funded development in Omaha, Nebraska, and a former country club and golf course, 35 acres, comprising 3 sites: Temple Israel, the Episcopal Diocese of Nebraska, including a church, the American Institute of Islamic Studies, and a culture center there with a mosque, a large center, tri-faith center. But they saying that they are bringing the world's 3 Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, together in this complex. They said, quote, "Our vision is to build bridges of respect, acceptance, and trust, challenge stereotypes, learn from each other, counter the influence of fear and misunderstanding." And then also, here is Dr. Saeed Muhiddin. I probably mispronounced his name, but he's president of the Islamic Center. And he said, "In a time when the world is engaged in building walls, this is a celebration of building bridges. As the Holy Quran reminds us of the common bond among us, we believe in what has been revealed to us, what's been revealed to you, Jews and Christians. Our God and your God is one and the same, and it is to Him we submit." It's an amazing project.
Yeah, that is an amazing project, and we do see some of that going on in parts of the country. Parts of the country. Another thing we definitely see dialogue between sometimes Roman Catholics, many times it's mainline Protestant groups, with Muslim groups and the Jewish community. But while they make headlines and we're aware of these things, many times the support for them locally is very thin. It's not like suddenly the whole Jewish community is rushing in to join hands with Muslims and mainline Protestants. It just isn't that way. Fortunately, the people who are projecting these things and who are setting them up want to act like the whole world's turning this way. It just isn't. We do find a growing class among the Jewish people who really get it, who really do stand up for conservative values, and who are not prepared to walk down the road to Islam.
Let's go to Port Huron, Michigan. Harry, you're on the air.
Hey, fellas. Bill, question for you. You mentioned earlier about what's happening on campus, and that really concerns me about the Muslim groups and that kind of groups. Are these pro-terrorist groups, or are they pro-jihad groups? Do you know?
Well, not overtly so, but the fact of the matter is the Muslim Students Associations, which are here in the United States and also in Canada, are definitely supported by the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood uses its influence. So, overtly, on the surface, they're gatherings of Muslim students. But where it goes and where it leads is an entirely different story.
Wow. Thanks for the question, Harry. I'm going to take a quick break and come back to more of your phone calls here at Crosstalk 800-733-9829. Our focus today on Israel. We'll be right back.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewweekend.com. Have people like Bill Bright, Chuck Colson, and even Billy Graham helped to bring the religious Trojan horse into the camp of evangelicalism? All 3 of these men have received the Templeton Prize. Billy Graham in 82, Colson in 93, and Bright in 96. John Templeton was a man who was into spirituality, New Age teachings. He said that we need the next stage of, quote, human divine progress on the evolutionary scale. He went on to talk about the need to develop, quote, a body of knowledge about God that does not rely on ancient revelations or scripture, end quote. Why would any Christian leader accept the prize and the money that goes with the Templeton Foundation's movement and goals? It is very striking. Indeed, I believe it's possible that some of the men that have been upheld as some of the greatest leaders of evangelicalism have in fact helped to introduce the religious Trojan horse inside the camp of evangelicalism. Jude 3, 2 Peter, and Acts 20 warn of this. For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House.
If you miss the information how you can get that free year subscription to Israel My Glory, be ready to jot down the information. We'll give that to you before the close of the broadcast. But we're going right back to the phone lines, as our guest today is Bill Sutter from the Friends of Israel Ministry. And we're going to be continuing to take your calls here at Crosstalk. Holding the longest has been Chris in West Dallas. You're on the air, Chris.
Yes, sir. I've got a couple comments. First of all, I believe that, like you said before, the comment was true that the Muslims are waiting for Antichrist. That's because the Bible says they don't believe that Jesus Christ is God and that he came in the flesh. So who we're dealing with truly is the spirit of Antichrist through these people. God loves them all to be saved, does he not? But my other comment is this. I believe that because we have turned away from God and cast him out of every aspect of our lives, God has sent man a strong delusion that they may believe in a lie. And the lie that he sent is that we would vote for and bring forth a Muslim president, Barack Hussein Obama. Now, for anybody to get behind this man and not believe who he truly is a lie, and we have been truly deceived as a nation. And for Christians to vote for this man, not only the first term, but even considering a second term, God forbid. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts here, Chris. Bill, this has not been an issue, though, that's been one side of the aisle or the other. I mean, even our previous president talked about Islam being a religion of peace.
Yes, it's true. We hear that kind of talk, but the fact of the matter is I couldn't agree more with Chris. In a descriptive sense, Islam is another one on the scene that certainly is Antichrist in a descriptive sense, if not the Antichrist of the book of Revelation, who and Daniel chapter 9, who appears on the scene and makes an actual covenant of peace with Israel and so on. So the spirit, and in a descriptive sense, for sure.
Let's go next to Ontario, Canada, and we have Dana calling. Dana, you're on the air.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I have a really sincere question. So as a Christian, we owe a lot to the Jewish people, but we cannot deny that a lot of things that like Israel politically has done is not been really good, and beneficial. So like if I were like a Muslim and then I saw that Christians only sided with Israel or Jewish people, it's a little hard to like open my heart, I think, to Christianity. Like as a Christian, how can we like differentiate between the political Israel and spiritual Israel, and how can we open to Muslims too, like to evangelize Muslims?
Okay, thank you,
what
Dana.
I'm saying?
I appreciate your call, Dana.
Yeah.
Bill?
Yes, I think it's very important that we concentrate on the gospel message, whether we're talking about Arabs, Muslims, or whether we're talking about whomever, the Jewish people. I think it's very important that we concentrate on the gospel message. There is also another message of Scripture, and it is God's work through the Jewish people, our heritage, to whom we owe our faith, Jewish Messiah, Jesus, a Jewish book, the Bible. We can't just walk away from a commitment to that, and the fact that God has in Scripture a literal Israel as a literal nation, a literal place, and a literal people of blessing to the entire world. So I think we owe attention to the entire message of the Bible. And, of course, in our dealings with Muslims or any other group, It's the gospel message that we must proclaim.
Thank you, Dana, for the call. Good question. To Oconomowoc. Richard, you're on the air.
Yes, I would like to thank the speaker that you're having on today for the Israel My Glory. We have received that magazine for many years. It is a wonderful magazine. All the listeners should try to subscribe to this. It's got terrific articles in there. I have a whole stack. I keep them because they're such a great reference back to and to see what's happening in our world pertaining to what the articles are all saying. We have ordered many things through this magazine. I would highly recommend everybody to order that magazine, and I thank the program today. Keep up the great work, and God bless you.
Thank you, Richard.
I thank Richard for that first-person testimonial. I couldn't say more.
Tell you what, we're going to squeeze in one last call, then folks will tell you how you can get that magazine. Ringgold, Georgia. Doug, you're on the air.
All right. A couple callers back. I've got something on my email. A college speaker was speaking to some students. Anyway, long story short, he was talking to this Muslim girl. And he talked to, what do you like Israel? And he started mentioning that. She didn't like it. And what about Hamas? Oh, they were just good folk. But then she said, Hamas gives her the order. She's coming out and she's killing. And that's yeah, I think, my opinion, I think most of them are terrorists.
Well, you know, there's a sense in which the world describes the conflict as tit for tat or equal morality. I think it's important that we look at things accurately and put them into proper, actual, on-the-ground perspective. And we recognize that from the founding of the State of Israel in 1948 to the present day, Israel has tried every which way, verbally and in every way, to strike a balance of peace with its neighbors, while, unfortunately, to this very day, its neighbors still call for the destruction of Israel.
Bill Sutter has been our guest here today on Crosstalk. We promised you information here one more time on how you can get that free one-year subscription to their magazine, Israel My Glory, and we've got, about 45 seconds here, Bill, if you'll tell our listeners again about the magazine and how they can obtain it.
Really appreciate the opportunity. We have close to 250,000 subscribers around the world. It's every 6 issues a year, every other month, 44 pages, full color. You can get a free one-year trial subscription by dialing 800-257-7843 or logging on to FOI for Friends of Israel, FOI.org.
Okay, again, folks, the number 800-257-7843, or going to the website foi.org. You'll see the header there for magazine, and then the free trial there for Israel My Glory. Bill, thank you for carving out some time to be with us today.
Jim, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us here today on Crosstalk as we keep you informed on vital issues impacting us across the nation and around the world.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.